The Auditor General last week criticised the SNP for failing to record the crucial decision to go ahead with ferry contracts that have so far cost the taxpayer £250 million. In response, a Scottish Government spokesperson said a thorough search has been conducted and the paperwork cannot be located. That is laughable. A few weeks ago, the First Minister was telling us a big boy did it and ran away. Now the dog's eaten all our homework. First Minister, these excuses would not cut it in a primary school classroom. So do you really expect anyone to believe this? And will you tell us, where has that crucial document gone? First Minister.
Well, first of all, there are actually more than 200 documents amounting to more than 1,500 pages relating to these decisions already in the public domain. They were published by the Scottish Government and they have been there for quite some time for anyone to read and scrutinise. There is one piece of documentation that is not there, which is the formal record of the decision to proceed with the final contract award. That is absolutely a key decision. But there are two further points that I think it is important to make. Firstly, there is no evidence that this has been withheld. In fact, let me quote the Auditor General. Well, let me quote the Auditor General at the committee last week. Our judgment is not that evidence has been withheld from us during the course of our audit work, but rather that an important piece of documentary evidence was not prepared in relation to the judgment ministers arrived at. That's the first point. Secondly, what is missing is a note confirming that ministers have considered the issues and the risks and decided to proceed. However, that is nevertheless clear in all of the surrounding documentation. So there was advice to ministers on the 8th of October. It says, and I'm summarising here, we would welcome the Minister's confirmation that he has considered the CMAL note, aware of the procurement and financial risks and content to give approval to CMAL to proceed. And then the day after that, on the 9th of October, Transport Scotland writes to CMAL and says, and I quote, "The Scottish Ministers have also seen and understood the CMAL risk paper and have noted and accepted the various technical and commercial risks identified and assessed by CMAL and have indicated that they are content for CMAL to proceed with the award of the contract." So the Minister's decision is actually narrated in the letter that Transport Scotland writes. So there is one link in the chain that is missing, but you can still very clearly follow the chain of events, something that Douglas Ross clearly hasn't even tried to do. Douglas Ross.
Right, let's try and get this straight. At the time, Nicola Sturgeon said this was one of the achievements we are most proud of. Now we are expected to believe that there is not a shred of evidence about the final crucial decision. They were so proud of it, they didn't want anyone to know about it. First Minister, given your pride, that should have been hanging on your wall. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's where the document is, hanging up in Nicola Sturgeon's wall in Bute House. Because, of course, the excuse we've just heard from the First Minister is there are hundreds of documents available, but wow, not the one we need, not the one the Auditor General was looking at. The vital document, it has vanished into thin air. So can the First Minister say, with a straight face, that this does not look like an almighty cover-up? And I'll ask again, because she didn't answer, where has that document gone?
That document would have been an email or a note that would have said the Minister is content on the basis of the reasons set out. Douglas Ross says, well, firstly, can I say, first of all, it was and is an achievement to have saved almost 400 jobs. 400 people, as we speak, working in Ferguson shipyard right now, earning a wage, supporting their families. I know jobs don't matter that much to the Conservatives, but they matter to this government, and they always will. So let me run through it again. On the 8th of October 2015, a submission goes to ministers asking for confirmation that ministers have considered the CMAL note, are aware of the potential procurement and financial risks. Of course, the mitigations are set out in this submission and are content to proceed. The next day, Transport Scotland write to CMAL and they say Scottish ministers have seen and understood the risk paper and have noted and accepted the technical and commercial risks and have decided to proceed. So the decision is recorded there. The bit that is missing is that link in the chain in between these two things that simply say the minister is content, but the fact that ministers were content is narrated in the document the next day. Can I suggest to Douglas Ross it might be a good use of his time to actually go and read the 200 documents and the 1,500 pages that are published on the Scottish Government website? Douglas Ross.
Well, can I say to the First Minister, it might be a good use of her time and this Parliament's time if she answers the question, because again, there is nothing. And this is Nicola Sturgeon, who has more ministers than ever before, more special advisers than ever before, more communication staff than ever before, and none of them can find the vital link, as she has called it. None of them can find the vital link that is missing. The First Minister claims to be a master of detail, right up until the point that the government makes a mistake. Then her memory's like a sieve. Every time the going gets tough, we hear she can't recall, she doesn't know, she's not sure. We are supposed to believe a £250 million decision was either never written down, has vanished, or has been illegally destroyed. The First Minister has botched this and covered up mistakes. Those trying to get to the bottom of this have been unable to, because Ferguson Marine employees can't speak openly because of SNP gagging orders. Now, the First Minister could change that. So will she tell us, and she's rifling through her folder, how many gagging orders were issued, and will she waive them all today to end this secrecy? And I'm going to keep asking, where has the vital document gone?
First Minister. The email, as the Auditor General said last week, it has not been withheld. It was, in his judgment, not prepared. So I am answering that question. But let me say again, let me set out again. So on the 8th of October 2015, there is a submission, goes to ministers, setting out CMAL's concerns, setting out the issues with the guarantee, setting out the steps that had been taken to mitigate those risks. That was what ministers considered. Then on the 9th of October, the very next day, Transport Scotland narrates to CMAL, yes, it is a third time, because Douglas Ross doesn't seem to want to understand it. So I'm going to read it, perhaps
First Minister, First Minister, sorry, when people are asking questions or responding to questions, I would be grateful if everyone else could cease from contributing at that point. Thank you. First Minister.
So let me just read it again, a bit more slowly. The Scottish ministers have also seen and understood the CMAL risk paper and have noted and accepted the various technical and commercial risks identified and assessed by CMAL, and have indicated that they are content for CMAL to proceed with the award of the contracts. So on the basis of the advice on the 8th of October, that is the decision that is narrated to CMAL on the 9th of October. And secondly, on the issue of non-disclosure agreements, the Scottish Government actually negotiated with the FML, so the previous owners of the yards, administrators, to secure the release of their employers who gave evidence to the committee inquiry from their terms and conditions of employment confidentiality obligations. And the Scottish Government fully complied with Audit Scotland's inquiry and will encourage everybody to do so fully with any future investigations or inquiries.
Douglas Ross.
So, again, I'm asking questions that Nicola Sturgeon won't answer. I specifically asked how, well, SNP members don't want to hear this, but I asked how many gagging orders are in place, so how many are there, and will the First Minister agree to waive them today? Because she has quoted the Auditor General from last week. Let's quote him from this morning. He told the Public Audit Committee of this Parliament that he would speak to Ferguson employees if those gagging orders were removed. So let's allow him to do his job, First Minister. And the Auditor General also said last week, and I quote, We recommend that there needs to be a fuller review. Lessons learned feels too glib to describe the circumstances before us. But all we've heard from Nicola Sturgeon is one glib statement after another. When asked to apologise to the islanders, she dismissively said, "Oh, for goodness sake." That was the response from Nicola Sturgeon to islanders who are struggling right now. Her feeble excuse for wasting £250 million on these ferries is it's regrettable. First Minister, it is not regrettable. It is scandalous. It is absolutely scandalous. And we know advice was given to government ministers not to go ahead with the deal, and we know they ignored it. So can the First Minister finally come clean and tell us? She mentions Scottish Government ministers, but did she personally see that advice not to proceed with this deal before the decision was made? And for the fourth and final time today, will she tell us where that vital piece of documentation is?
First Minister.
Leadership is in some difficulty, but this really is desperate stuff. I have quoted from the advice given to ministers. I've quoted from the Transport Scotland letter that went to CMAL narrating the decision that ministers took. But let me go back to issues of non-disclosure agreements. Nobody, and let me say this very clearly, nobody in the employment of Ferguson Shipyard will be prevented in any way, shape or form from speaking to Audit Scotland and speaking in full to Audit Scotland. And I can point again to the fact it was the Scottish Government that negotiated with FML's administrators to actually release employees from the confidentiality obligations they had back then. So everybody will be fully free and enabled to speak to Audit Scotland. And secondly, in terms of my views on island communities, I think, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong here, I think the official report will show the regret I expressed about the impact on island communities. Next, in terms of a fuller review, I think the first exchange we had on this issue after the Audit Scotland report was published, I pointed to the recommendation about a fuller review and said that we would be considering the terms of that. But I think, and actually I think the Auditor General said this last week, that the focus now, the priority must be on completing the ferries, and a key milestone, of course, was delivered in that vein yesterday. And lastly, I take full responsibility for everything this government does. I always will, and perhaps that's the difference between me and some other leaders across these islands.